Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, reporting to you from the Overflow Room. It's so good to be here. Every so often I come in and I wander about looking at the overflow, wondering maybe there's something here that I really ought to talk about. And I found something. Actually, it took about 30 seconds. But, here's a piece of music, or pieces of music, that I think deserve a little bit of attention and that I don't think we've heard from in quite some time. They are the delicious little symphonies of William Boyce. Remember those? They had their 15 minutes of fame a few decades ago. Boyce, in case you're wondering, was a contemporary of Handel. His actual dates were 1711 to 1779. He was 25 years younger than Handel. He was the next generation of Handel guys, and he sounds a lot like Handel. He really, really does. And if you always have wondered why there isn't so much Handel orchestral music, or you wish that there were more, or you find trolling through the detritus of the Baroque era a little bit intimidating, well, Boyce symphonies make a really good option because they sound like leftover Handel orchestral music. And I don't mean leftover in a bad way. Some things taste better as leftovers. These are delightful works. There are 8 of them. He called them symphonies. They aren't really, in the sense that a symphony like the Pastoral Symphony from Messiah, a symphony in those days was any piece of independent orchestral music. That was a symphony or sinfonia. And then only gradually did they begin to take shape as something else. But what's really fascinating about these, I think, especially given our current Haydn Symphony crusade, for example, is that these were published in 1760, which is exactly, down to the minute, the same time that Haydn's first symphonies were being composed. And they couldn't be more different. These obviously belong to the Baroque period, to a different era, whereas Haydn's belong to what was going to become the classical period, the fully modern, up-to-date, trendy classical phase. And it just goes to show how strong regional differences still were at this time. England, of course, would eventually catch up, as England usually does. But at that point, it was still very much a Baroque Handelian kind of place. And Boyce was responding to that. Now, about, 4 decades ago, these things really had their 15 minutes of fame, these pieces, because people were looking for charming Baroque music that sounded like Handel. And everybody with their period instrument groups and non-period instrument groups was doing them. My first recording was with the Bournemouth Sinfonietta on CRD, a good label, deserves to sort of still exist. I think it does, but it has a rather low profile at the moment. But remember those? And then, of course, the period instrument stuff got moving, and everybody chimed in. They popped up with let's see, what was it? Pinnock and the English Concert. This is very good. Hogwood did them. They were on Chandos, Nimbus, every British chamber Baroque type group, Mariner, good heavens, Neville Mariner did them at least twice, maybe 3 times, who knows. Everybody did them. And since then, it may be that there is music that can only sustain a certain number of repetitions. And nobody's gotten much enthusiasm for them since, because there haven't been new recordings in a long time. I think this one is the most recent. This is the one I'm talking about with Kevin Mallon and the Aradia Ensemble from Toronto. And this is an absolutely wonderful recording. It was made in 2003, and it got a 10/10 review on ClassicsToday.com from my partner there, David Vernier, and Handelian and Baroque music kind of guy. And it really deservedly so. It's quite wonderful. I'm going to play you some samples of this. We'll talk about the pieces a little bit first, but it really is kind of interesting to see how these pieces come and go in the classical music firmament. And at the moment, the Boyce symphonies seem to be a go, which means they are absolutely ideal for us to revive them, because really they are delightful. They're lovely, lovely works. Now, as is typical of music of the time, I mean, Handel's Opus 3 Concerti Grossi are an excellent example. Boyce cobbled these pieces together from his theatrical music. These were overtures and interludes from other pieces. And we know what those pieces are, but it's absolutely no help at all to know that, for example, the first movement of Symphony Number 3 was originally part of the introduction or overture to Boyce's setting of Dryden's play, Perthracticus, or the umbilicus of phlebotomy. I mean, do we care? I don't think so. Or maybe the serene concluding slow movement of number 6 was taken from the Thanksgiving Ode on the recovery of the Earl of Throckmorton from goiter surgery. I mean, these are the kinds of pieces that this music comes from. And it's no wonder, given its charm and melodic deliciousness, that Boyce decided to publish them separately and rescue them from the oblivion of some of these theatrical productions, because even though these symphonies have achieved their 15 minutes of fame, there is very, very little interest in anything else that Boyce did. And some of his odes and other choral pieces and vocal pieces have been recorded. There was a sort of a mini series on ASV. And the music is what you expect. It's post-Handel niceness and quite charming. But these symphonies have withstood the test of time to the extent anything by Boyce has. And I want to play you some samples of them and have a little fun with them. Now, there are 8 of these little symphonies, and all of them are in 3 movements, except for number 6, which is in 2 movements. And the first 4 of them adopt what might loosely be termed the Italian sinfonia form. But, that's technically fast, slow, fast. That's the idea. But most of these don't do that. They are in 3 movements, but you get fast, 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 or fast, fast minuet or gavotte or some sort of dance. The last 4 of them, that is numbers 5 through 8, adopt more of a French overture form. And the French overture form, of course, is, like all of Handel's overtures or Bach's orchestral suites, is a large opening movement that begins with a march in sort of jerky rhythm, and then a fugal allegro, very contrapuntal and busy. And then after that, you get a suite of dances. And again, these kind of do it and kind of don't. Boyce was not being doctrinaire in that respect, because he was taking what was available and grouping it basically by tonality. Only one of the pieces is in the minor. The last one is in D minor. And only one of them, number 5, has trumpets and drums, the orchestra basically being strings and oboes for the rest of them. And like I said, you really would think that this is something that Handel wrote, or someone who knew him very well, as Boyce apparently did. And let's just listen to the opening of Symphony Number 1, just to get your bearings. We'll get our bearings and see how they are. Again, this is the Aradia Ensemble with Kevin Mallon on Naxos, a really fine performance. It's the one I would recommend anyway. But the fact of the matter is, there are no bad performances of these pieces. They're very easy to play. They're invariably delightful. And, you basically will enjoy whichever ones you get. So I wouldn't worry too much about going through, a dozen recordings of them to say that they all basically sound similar, which they do. Here is the opening of Symphony Number 1, the first movement. The essence of Baroque charm, is it not? It's really, really cute. And I'm going through these again after, I haven't listened to them in a while. It's really been fun, I have to say. I just want you to hear some samples of the charm and attractiveness of this music. What else have we got here? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, the opening of Symphony Number 5. This is the one with trumpets and drums, and it's in quasi-French overture form. The opening march is actually kind of peppy for your typical French overture, but I want to play you the entire fugal allegro because it's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful, with thrilling writing for the brass, and it's really exciting. It deserves a lot more attention than it gets. I mean, remember when, like, the Masterpiece Theater theme, which was, Mouret, the symphonies and fanfares for the King's Supper, that got played every 15 minutes. But this could have been just as popular. It really deserves to be some sort of, highfalutin, snooty theme thing, or the music for some high-end commercial or something like that, Listen to this. It's really good. But Boyce is not all just quick music. I mean, there are some very, very charming, slower pieces, such as the conclusion of the Symphony Number 6, which is technically a French overture thing, but it only has two movements. And because it has a sort of slow, fast, slow form, it's not in anything. It's just a Boycean Boyce thing. It's a Boyce. Here is a little bit of the concluding larghetto of the quite Boyce-like Symphony Number 6. Finally, and last but certainly not least, there is the really charming Symphony Number 7, which in which Boyce shows his Englishness. It concludes with a jig, which is called a jig. In European parlance, that would be a gigue. The French gigue is the English jig. But the jig, of course, has its own unique robustness and rhythmic impetus in its English form, and the concluding movement of the seventh is one such. Here's a bit of it. So as you can hear clearly, I think plainly, this is music it exists merely to charm. None of these pieces is longer than about 7 or 8 minutes. The longest single movement is about 4 minutes and a bit. The shortest is a little over 1 minute. These are tiny pieces. They are not the extended developmental things that Haydn and his crew were starting to invent in Vienna. They are purely the orchestral scraps and bits of larger works, but they're none the worse for that. They're full of invention and personality, and even if it's more of a generalized personality, perhaps it's the English Baroque personality, but we all know what a lovely personality that was. In fact, there's so much good music from this period. And fortunately, most of it's been recorded, and I hope to talk to you about it, but I really will only talk to you about it if I have permission to play samples, because you've got to hear it. It doesn't do any good to discuss Baroque music in the abstract, because it all sounds like Baroque music. In order to hear the things that make it interesting or make it different, which is usually melodic charm or some sort of harmonic something or other, you really have to be able to listen to it. And this is a wonderful opportunity because we have these symphonies in such an excellent performance, and courtesy of Naxos, I can play it for you. So keep on listening, folks, to your Boyce symphonies. It's about time someone hauled them down off their shelves and gave them another play. They deserve it. Take care.